Carol Kaye has played on more hit records than almost any musician alive, and she has spent a lifetime knowing exactly what greatness sounds like. These 6 musicians are the ones she calls timeless.
You'd never think that most of those would be hits.
Number 6, Stevie Wonder. There are musicians who learn the rules, and then there are musicians who make the rules irrelevant. Stevie Wonder belongs to the second category, and almost everyone who has ever played alongside him says so. He writes, produces, arranges, and plays nearly every instrument on his own records. His 1976 album, Songs in the Key of Life, debuted at number 1, spending 14 weeks at the top of the Billboard 200, a record at the time for a double album. Carol Kaye has spoken about what separates a great musician from a legendary one: the ability to make every note feel necessary. Stevie Wonder never plays a note that doesn't need to be there. That economy, that instinct for the emotional center of a song, it is exactly what Carol Kaye has built her career around. When someone who played bass on Good Vibrations, The Sounds of Silence, and hundreds of film scores calls a musician timeless, you listen. Wonder's catalog moves from Motown soul to jazz-inflected pop to political anthem to intimate ballad. And every stop sounds completely inevitable in retrospect. That is the mark Carol Kaye means when she uses the word timeless. Not music that sounds like its era, but music that sounds like it was always going to exist. His Grammy wins span multiple decades. His influence reaches from R&B to hip-hop to contemporary pop, and the musicians who cite him as a primary influence number in the hundreds. Stevie Wonder has served the song his entire life, and the song has rewarded him with immortality. Number 5. Wes Montgomery. Most guitarists spend their lives trying to develop a signature sound. Wes Montgomery was born with one. And it was unlike anything the instrument had produced before. He played with his thumb instead of a pick, producing a warm, rounded tone that musicians described as something between silk and smoke. His technique was not a stylistic choice. It was a physical necessity that became one of the most imitated sounds in jazz history. Montgomery recorded for Riverside and later Verve and A&M, earning Grammy recognition and crossover chart success, rare for a jazz guitarist in the 1960s. Carol Kaye worked in the same recording world Montgomery navigated. The brutal Los Angeles studio circuit, where players had minutes to learn a chart and one take to get it right. She understood what it cost to play at that level with that consistency. Montgomery once said, "I play what I feel, and I just hope somebody feels it too." Somebody always did. Montgomery came up in Indianapolis, largely self-taught, working a day job while playing clubs at night. He was not handed a platform. He built one, note by note, long before the industry took notice. His use of octaves, playing the same note on 2 strings simultaneously, became a defining technique that guitarists have studied ever since. Carol Kaye has described great musicians as the ones who solve problems no one else even identified as problems. Montgomery identified a problem with the guitar's emotional range and solved it with his thumb. That kind of creative intelligence does not belong to a decade. It belongs to every generation willing to listen closely enough. Number 4. Miles Davis. There is a version of jazz history before Miles Davis, and then there is everything after. The line between them is not subtle. Davis reinvented his own sound so many times that critics spent decades arguing about which version was the real one. The cool jazz of Birth of the Cool, the modal revolution of Kind of Blue, the electric fury of Bitches Brew. 3 different eras, 3 different sounds, one musician driving all of it. Kind of Blue, released in 1959, became the best-selling jazz album in history, a record it still holds. What Carol Kaye recognizes in Miles Davis is something she has lived herself, the refusal to repeat yourself just because something worked. He once said, "I'll play it first and tell you what it is later." That is not arrogance. That is an artist who trusts the work more than the label on it. Consider the musicians who passed through his bands: Coltrane, Bill Evans, Herbie, Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett. That list is a hall of fame unto itself. Davis could identify greatness in others before the world had caught up, and he put those musicians in rooms where they had no choice but to become the best versions of themselves. Carol Kaye has spoken about how the standard set at the top of a session pulls everyone beneath it upward. Davis set that standard so high that even his sidemen became legends. Miles Davis raised the ceiling, and every musician who came after has been living inside the room he built. Number 3, Ray Charles. Some musicians play a style. Ray Charles became one. He is the figure historians point to when they describe the moment gospel and rhythm and blues stopped being separate conversations.
When you see me in misery, come over, baby, see my
That synthesis changed American popular music at the root. His 1960 recording, Georgia on My Mind, reached number 1 and earned him 2 Grammys, including Record of the Year, his first major mainstream crossover. Carol Kaye has spoken about the difference between players who perform emotion and players who transmit it. Ray Charles transmitted it, through the piano keys, through the vocal cords, through the room itself. Charles once said, "I was born with music inside me. It was a force already within me when I arrived on this scene." Carol Kaye knows what it means to carry music as a physical thing. Ray Charles understood it in a way that went beyond technique or theory. He did not interpret a song, he inhabited it. That is why she calls him timeless, because emotion at that level does not expire. His 1962 album, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music, became one of the best-selling records of that year, proving that the audience for genuine emotion has no genre boundary. He played jazz, gospel, soul, country, pop, and blues. Not as a commercial exercise, but because the music inside him was bigger than any single shelf it could be placed on. Ray Charles refused every ceiling the industry tried to put on him. And that is exactly the kind of musician Carol Kaye means when she says timeless. Number 2, Frank Sinatra. After Frank Sinatra, a pop singer told a story, and the band was just the room the story lived in.
These arms of mine are open, hoping you'll appear. I know you're not very far.
That shift changed the relationship between vocalist and arrangement, between lyric and listener, between a performance and a piece of art. Sinatra recorded more than 1,000 songs across his career, and his 1955 Capitol album, In the Wee Small Hours, is widely credited as the first cohesive concept album in popular music. Carol Kaye played on hundreds of records built around a vocalist. She knew, from the instrument up, what it took for a singer to command an arrangement rather than just ride it. Sinatra's phrasing was not an accident. He studied it from Billie Holiday and Tommy Dorsey's trombone breathing, and built it into something that belonged only to him. That line says something important. Not critical approval, not peer recognition, but the work itself at full scale. Carol Kaye names him timeless, not out of nostalgia, but because Sinatra understood that a great vocal performance is not about the singer. It is about making the listener feel less alone. Frank Sinatra made millions of people feel less alone, and that does not go out of style. His music still appears in film scores, wedding receptions, and late-night streaming playlists, because the emotions it addresses never become dated. Loneliness does not go out of fashion, neither does ambition, or the ache of a love that did not survive. Carol Kaye approaches the bass with that same precision. Every note placed, every rest intentional, nothing wasted. She hears in Sinatra a musician's musician, someone whose surface appeal was effortless exactly because the work underneath it was relentless. That combination of discipline and feeling is the hardest thing in music to achieve, and Frank Sinatra made it sound like the easiest thing in the world. Number 1, the Beatles. Every era of popular music has a before and an after. The Beatles are the dividing line, and almost every serious musician who lived through it will tell you the same thing. Carol Kaye was working in the Los Angeles studios when Beatlemania arrived in America. February 1964, the Sullivan appearance, the screaming from every direction. The session musicians heard it differently than the fans did. They heard the writing, how Lennon and McCartney were doing something compositionally that had no clean precedent. Melody lines that behaved like conversations. Harmonic choices that belonged more to classical music than to pop. Arrangements that kept getting stranger and better at exactly the same time. Between 1963 and 1970, the Beatles placed 20 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. They also fundamentally changed what a recording studio was for, from a room that captured a live performance to an instrument in its own right. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band did not just win the Grammy for Album of the Year, it rewrote what the medium was capable of. There's no such thing as a bad Beatle record. Carol Kaye has a standard that almost nothing meets. She has said herself that the bar for a great record is high enough that most music never clears it. The Beatles cleared it every time. Across skiffle, Merseybeat, psychedelia, folk, orchestral pop, and experimental studio work, they kept raising the ceiling on what a pop record could be. She calls them timeless, not because they belong to a particular decade, but because every decade since has spent its time trying to understand what they did and why it worked. Their catalog has never left the cultural conversation, not for a single year. New listeners discover them constantly, and those listeners do not experience the music as history. They experience it as discovery. Carol Kaye is someone who has heard the machinery of a hit record from the inside, who knows what it takes to make something that sounds both inevitable and surprising at the same time. The Beatles made that sound easy. It was never easy, but they made it sound that way. And the distance between those two things is where genius lives. And that, according to Carol Kaye, is exactly what timeless means. 6 names. Everyone chosen by someone who has earned the right to choose. Carol Kaye built her reputation on sessions. Hundreds of them, across decades, alongside the most demanding producers and arrangers in the history of recorded music. When she calls a musician timeless, it is not a compliment. It is a professional assessment from the studio floor, not the stands. Stevie Wonder, Wes Montgomery, and the 4 musicians alongside them share something that cannot be faked: the ability to make a listener feel something real every single time. Timeless is not handed out in music. It gets earned, slowly, over years of work that outlasts every trend that tried to define it. These 6 musicians earned it, and the person saying so has the resume to prove the call is right. If one of these names surprised you, or if you think someone is missing, drop it in the comments. That conversation is exactly what this channel is built for. Subscribe if you want more from the people who actually lived inside the music. The best stories are always told from the inside. The greatest musicians do not chase timeless. They simply play the truth and let time do the rest.